Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at Community Conversations, Leading in the Time of Crisis in K-12 Education, Effective Communication, and Supporting Student Learning. Here to do a welcome is Dean Jason Lane.
Great. Thank you, Jerry, and thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Jason Lane. I have the great privilege of being the Dean of the School of Education at the University at Albany. The School of Education was created more than 175 years ago as New York State's first public teachers college. Since that time, we have maintained a deep and abiding commitment to supporting educators across New York State. 7 weeks ago, as COVID-19 began to unravel around us, our faculty, students, and staff knew that we could quickly leverage our expertise to try to help the parents and the teachers and the students who are trying to navigate this unprecedented learning crisis. Because of the expertise that we have in online learning, we moved to stand up a new website called remoteed.org. That website provides a list of curated resources organized by subject matter and grade level to help parents and teachers navigate what seems to be an ever-increasing number of online resources available to them, in addition to tips and strategies about how to operate more effectively in the remote ED environment. We knew also that it was important to, I think, continue conversations with each other in ways of mutual support. And as part of that, we kicked off these community conversations. And so I'm delighted that we were able to host this one today in conjunction with the Capital Region BOCES. It is my great privilege to welcome one of our alums who has joined me today, Joe Dragone from the Capital Region BOCES. So Joe, I will turn it to you.
Great, thank you, Jason, and thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you to my colleagues for joining us today. It's a great opportunity to have a chat on a large scale. I know we have 100 plus people that have registered in the room, so welcome to everybody on behalf of BOCES, and I see many of my friends and colleagues from the university on the line as well. So as Jason said, as a proud alum, it's great to see everyone across so many departments and your leadership University, the leadership of the School of Education, and all the work that you're doing to support what's going on in the field and supporting of all the educational leaders as we're dealing with many of the issues we're going to talk about today. I want to thank my colleagues for taking their time for joining us as well. Adrian Leon, who is our Director of Communications here at BOCES, been with the organization 15 plus years, and many of you might not know, we do communications for many school districts from throughout the state. So our footprint is statewide in terms of helping folks communicate and navigate that work. Jodie Monroe from the Bethlehem Central School District, she's been superintendent there since 2015. Previously served as the assistant superintendent and middle school principal, a great leader in our region. And Jodie, thank you so much for joining us. Dave Blanchard, superintendent of the Schoharie Central School District, and Dave has been there since 2015 as well. Tremendous experience at the building level, the district level, and at the superintendent in a rural school district. And our friends in Schoharie County have a whole bunch of different challenges that they face as well. So Dave, thank you for sharing your perspective with us. And Jaleo Duca, who is the principal of Ballston Spa High School, a good friend and colleague for many years. He's been in that capacity for 2 years now, started as assistant principal and has background in department leadership, program leadership in South Colony schools and other opportunities as well. So to my friends, thank you for joining. You see we have a tremendous amount of experience in a variety of leadership areas as we're working regionally to try to tackle some pretty significant challenges. So that being said, Jason, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Joe, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Over the past several weeks, we've tackled a number of issues related to helping parents navigate what is now essentially homeschooling and partnering with their teachers and making that happen. How do you deal with, or how do you help and support students with special needs? How do you become more mindful in this era where I think we're all under increasing stress? But today we thought, as Joe mentioned, the important topic here was leadership, because so much of what is happening today it requires a great deal of leadership as we navigate these unprecedented times. So the session today is not, we did not ask anybody to create a formal presentation, but rather we want to facilitate a conversation. We put together a set of guiding questions that has been shared with the panelists in advance. If you have questions for the panelists, what I would invite you to do is to put those into the chat box, and as we can, we will navigate to those toward the end of this session today. So to kick us off, though, we thought we might just have a very quick answer and ask all four of our panelists to respond. But now that we are more than 6, maybe 7 weeks into this, what is top of your mind right now? So, Joe, maybe I'll kick it back to you to start us off.
Well, great. Thank you, Jason. I guess big picture, no matter how we slice the pie, top of mind as always is teaching and learning. I think you really kind of hit the nail on the head. Just to quickly say again, you said everybody's in a position of homeschooling. That's the reality of it. So as much as teachers are providing support, the teaching and learning environment is much different. And we're hearing from tons of parents. I could call today, Joe, I'm trying to work at home. I'm trying to school at home. I'm trying to help my teachers. So I think first and foremost is helping support our staff and the staff regionally with resources to help them support children and support parents at home, because it really is one thing to make a decision to homeschool. It's another thing to have a decision that I have to homeschool on top of all my other responsibilities. So I think navigating that under the broader lens of teaching and learning is top of the bill, and how we continue to support staff in doing that and supporting kids in a different environment.
David, look like you were ready to jump in.
Yeah, so I think for us in Schoharie, what are we thinking about? What's most on our minds right now remains safety, our staff safety, our student safety, trying to make sure people are following the rules, but the stress of our looming budget issues certainly are really heavy on our minds. So after safety and keeping people safe, the next thing that's of concern is what will our school budgets look like, and what will the fallout be for our communities as we face really financially challenging times?
Absolutely. It goes part and parcel with what we can do for the teaching and learning of our students, is what we can afford to do as well. Jodie?
There's a lot of things on my mind lately. I think my mind is keeping everyone engaged. An online format is not what we're used to for our staff or for our families and students. So trying to keep them, motivated, especially when we heard the announcement that schools would not be reopened this year, very discouraging. And then along with that is looking at the future and the reopening of our schools and what potential changes will we have to deal with, I think are some of the biggest things on my mind lately, because it's a challenging and people are looking for the positives and looking to the future. So trying to keep innovation and engagement in moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. This is unlike any crisis we may have encountered in the past, where it happens and you recover. This is a marathon without an end in sight right now. And to the point of closing schools, I'll say I had a very tearful kindergartner when we had to break the news to her that she wasn't going back to see her friends. It was a tough day as well. Gian Leo, how about you?
Sure. I think for me at the building level and us, there's two questions that are always on my mind. Are we doing everything we can to account for all our students? And then, is there something going overlooked that we haven't thought about yet? So when we look at, the crisis big picture, it can be overwhelming, but when we break it down, those two questions, whether we're working on, different pieces of how we're going to make things work for our families, for our students, for our stakeholders, I keep coming back to those two questions. Is there something that we haven't thought about, that we've overlooked? And just having that open dialogue and being able to trust the people you work with has been helpful.
And I think that's a great segue to the next question here, which is really what has been your highest need, related to dealing with this pandemic? How have you worked to address it, and what resources might have been shifted to make that happen? So maybe reverse order. Julia, I'll ask you to go first.
I think for our building, one of the highest needs, and that started, 7 weeks ago and is still kind of on everybody's mind is how are we continuing to provide services to our students and families. There's a lot of people that depend on the school for everyday things, for various services across, all different mediums. How are we removing some of the barriers, but still trying to have those supports in place for kids, for families, for other members of the community.
Great. Jodie?
One of, I think, our highest needs would be the student engagement, and particularly with our students who were at risk prior, some of our special education students who have a tremendous amount of needs. And meet the needs of all of our students and our families. So I think when we talked about how do we ensure those connections are happening and we are engaging kids, we've been really using personal outreach. We do obviously Google Meet and Zooms, but for students and families who aren't engaged, making phone calls from multiple levels, from the teacher level up through the administration, to really try and get them to participate and stay connected to the school.
Excellent. David?
So I think one of our largest needs, being a small rural school district, has to do with internet connectivity, MiFi's, Wi-Fi's, devices. So we really struggled right off the bat trying to connect kids with online learning resources. And even today I had a request for another Verizon Jetpack MiFi, and we frankly ran out of them. But it's been a great challenge trying to connect kids with teachers online.
Great. The technology divide is certainly a big issue that we need to be dealing with. Adrian, you weren't on my screen, so I forgot you on the last one. So maybe I'll come to you now to sort of on this resource issue.
Sure. Well, I guess I can answer kind of 1 and 2 at the same time. From a communications perspective, the big thing is meeting people where they are. And there's been so much happening, right? We're planning, we're looking ahead, we're trying to make sure everybody has devices, we're trying to make sure people are engaged, we're doing all this operational stuff. We want to make sure, information's going out, stuff's on a website, but what do people need, and what are their basic questions and concerns, and are we addressing those, and are we meeting those in a way that keeps us relevant in their minds? Because as soon as we stop doing that, we really break down that trust that we work so hard to maintain and to keep going. So every day during this whole situation, that's, I think, what's been top of mind, and then moving the resources to where they need to go to address those needs, whether it's moving staff around, whether it's, just providing some new piece of information that people need to send out. But, you use the example of the day that the governor closed school for the rest of the year, and the way you felt and the way your child felt. And I think that was happening across the state. And as schools, if in the way we're communicating and the way we're interacting, families doesn't take that into consideration, people stop seeing us as partners, and we've got to keep that going. So
it's a really great point. And you and Joe sit at a different level. You have a different perch than being at any single district or school. And so just thoughts there as sort of the work of the BOCES in coordinating among the various schools, and maybe even sort of how do you leverage your collective resources in a way that is responding to this crisis?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's been really the focus of our work, and I think we swung really quickly by marshaling our workforce to fully support all the districts that we support. When you count them statewide, it's in the hundreds that we do different services for. So a couple of points, and I think one on the educational side of our shop to the empowerment piece that in the connection piece that Jodie was referring to. There's always for every time we were lectured about one size fits all, and we're living in a one size fits all, worse than a one size fits all has ever been, and everything that we do. And on the special education division side, our teachers are spending more time, frankly, going out to homes because we have to, because of the students that we serve. And it's that much more challenging in our career and technical programs too, as we're trying to get kids through certifications. And online can be online, but the reality is it's not the same as working in a lab with equipment. So marshaling pieces around that to get the educational component of our two educational divisions strengthened has been a ton of work and really a tremendous high need. And then from the regional perspective, just to Dave's point below, we have been using all of our leverage and all of our buying power when it comes in terms of supplies. And I know, you walk into the store, you can't get hand sanitizer, but, we have been bulk buying for the region, for everything from computers to hand sanitizer to Clorox wipes to you name it. So we have been working hard trying to marshal all of those supplies and other operational positions as well. We do shared transportation, we do shared food service. The food service lift has been difficult for everyone. We know the demand on the food pantry and all those other constraints. So we have been using a regional lens on those pieces, and also with childcare. We know the schools were responsible for childcare, and we've been using a regional lens with that. We're fortunate to have a great relationship with our local child care provider, Bright Side Up. Abby Kavachik and her team is just fabulous. We speak, I don't know how many times a week, and she gets information from OCFS, provides it to me. I share it with districts on a needed basis from parents or essential workers that need child care. So coordinating some things as a broader level has, one, brought us, I think, better organizational structures with broader things, and two, is it allowed us to marshal our leverage and our power and a larger representation to help procure and secure resources for districts.
Great. So let me pick up on that. I'm going to go down to number 4, and maybe for our school leaders first, and then to our BOCES colleagues. But so much of navigating this crisis is about communication. It's communication out to our teachers or our parents, communication to our parents and our students, communication internally with our teachers and our leaders, and obviously the flow between districts, which I know has been coordinated through the Capital Region BOCES. But Jodie, for you, how have you dealt with this issue of communication? What have you learned from it? What are the things we should be thinking about moving forward?
Initially, when all this started, it felt like I was communicating with staff and families just about daily. And trying to just keep up with the communication so people feel confident and assured that we kind of know what we're doing. So I think initially we were providing that information. As Joe said, there was a lot of information about meals and childcare. Then at some point I remember thinking, oh my God, these people are probably getting sick of hearing from me because there was so much communication. So you try to be mindful about how much you're sending, but also meaningful and relevant for the groups. But I've heard from many of our families and staff about how appreciative they were and how they did feel more confident and relaxed and assured that we were moving in the direction, with everything else going on, they wanted to hear regularly from us. I think that it's always a balance, but I think in this regard, err on the side of caution and probably more is better in times like these. And I think our parents appreciated it. And who knew? I never thought we would be communicating about some of these things, but we're living in a different world right now. And so I think the more we share with our families and our staff, the more confident they are and more comfortable are with working with their children in very different capacities.
I think that's a great point. The sort of ideas of trust and comfort is important. David, how about you?
So initially I thought I had a really good, strong approach to communications. As a district, we have a person on staff that's responsible for communications and does a excellent job for us. We have a school messenger program that allows us to text, email, and call every home in our district. So early on, those communication systems were working really well for us. Now, community relations is so important. And to Jodie's point, I had some concerns about, satiating our community and getting people frustrated with the amount of information that's coming out of the schools, because it's not just coming out of my office, but it comes out of the communications department, and each building has communication. So when families are stressed and they're unsure how to respond to a teacher or an assignment that their child is doing, and then they get the next communication that may change or may talk about how we're going to grade, or it seems very endless. But I think one of the things we've done well as a region, our superintendents are talking to each other daily. We're talking about these types of strategies, how we're responding, and we're trying to come up with consistent messages. So throughout our region, there's some familiarity from district to district. So if you're in Schoharie County and there's Middleburg and Sharon Springs, Schoharie and Cobleskill, we're all saying much of the same thing in the same way. So that's been very helpful, but it's certainly proving to be a challenging time with regard to communication.
So maybe take it down to the building level now, and Julia, if you want to talk a little bit about what's happening with you.
I mean, I think at the building level, it's really about trusting the team. I'm in constant community internally anyway. There's constant communication. I'm talking to Superintendent Slens constantly. The members of my team at the building level, our instructional teacher leaders. We're Google meeting, we're texting. So internally, there's just constant communication. But you need to kind of balance that with what you put out, because I think at first, a lot of our parents were getting so many messages from, teachers, and, some of our kids have 6-7 different teachers, and they're in parents' inboxes are just getting full, and they're getting overwhelmed. So we went to more of a strategy where, let's put out a concise, thoughtful message once a week. So that's kind of the message that I've been doing, is giving an update. I might update staff a couple times a week, but students and parents is once a week, and trying to be strategic in the type of communication that you put out and being timely with it. We're trying to figure out, what is the most important thing in this next 1 week chunk for parents to know, but also keep an eye on the next 2 or 3 weeks to kind of give them a preview of what's to come. There's a lot to be said when I pick up the phone and talk to a parent, and they're on edge and they don't know what's going to happen. And if they ask me a question, I can tell them I don't know, but here's what I do know. Then that conversation happens, and it kind of gives them a little bit of relief to know that, yeah, we're working on it. And, if you can just wait till Friday till I put on my email, I'll have some detailed plans. So it's really just about thinking of the timing of things and trying to put out the most important information in a timely fashion.
That's great. No, I think it's incredibly helpful. And Adrian, this is really your area of expertise. So some thoughts maybe on both, how the BOCES is thinking about the communication, but also any tips for those who are in district or building roles where they are thinking about communication issues also.
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say you have on here, what are you communicating about that has surprised you? And
yes,
nothing surprises me anymore. But, one of the things I've really thought a lot about, so Joe mentioned we support more than 50 school districts around the state with our communication service, and we do a lot of training on crisis communication. We're regularly working through strategies and bring all our new staff go through a crisis communication training. So, when you do a lot of that work, people will say, well, in a crisis, you always fall back on your training. And boy, did I see that play out with our team. And I was really thankful for the work we've done over the years to not only know how to act in a crisis, but also to some of the communication structures that were in place in the districts we work with. Dave mentioned, having the school messenger system. And I think districts have found it's really important to have these tools that allow you to get right to people, send direct messages, whether it's an email, a text message, a voicemail. I think one of the things we saw when the crisis first started is our activity on tools like social media really ground to a halt. And we were using those direct messaging tools to get things out because that was the right tool for the moment. And as it's gone on, I think we've started to build back up our presence on social media. But, if we hadn't done that forward thinking planning ahead of time, we wouldn't have been able to be that effective in the moment. So that's really been an important aspect of this for us.
Yeah, that's great. And it really sort of goes to show why planning is so important. I think we get it. We do it sometimes and we wonder why we do it because we never need it. Now we need it. And it's playing out is exactly why we're doing it. David, maybe to go to you first on this one, but what's been your biggest struggle, as a leader in maintaining the continuity of learning?
So I think trying to engage with students has been our biggest struggle. So we initially had our school counselors reaching out to families that teachers were struggling to connect with, and then it went from school counselors to school administrators to even myself at times reaching out to kids that either stopped engaging with school or had other responsibilities to their home. So we have students here that have part-time jobs that became somewhat full-time jobs. If they're juniors and seniors, they're providing for their families. And so expectations had to change. It became a real struggle to try to engage or re-engage students throughout the last 6 weeks. So that's been an ongoing battle. And I think something that our teachers really need to understand. We've never had a kind of a window into the households or into the world of our students like we do right now. And as we're seeing what's happening, it really helps our understanding. And I think we have to be empathetic and sensitive to the needs of our students to try to get them to engage.
Great. Jean Leah, how about you?
I think at first when it started, it was finding that balance and being consistent across courses, grade levels, and really as the building as a whole. We didn't really know how long it was going to be. So the first 2 weeks were kind of like, okay, let's put some plans together to get us through 2 weeks. Then it went a little further, then a little further. So, that kind of middle portion, the week 3 to week 5 was kind of calibrating, what are we gonna focus on? What standards? And now it's really with what Mr. Blanchard's saying, the engagement piece. How are we reaching out to those kids we haven't heard from yet? We're making good progress in reaching out to them, whether it's a phone call or doing a home visit or working with our SRO to do a wellness check. But it's really that engagement piece now. We're in a good place as far as what we want. But now how are we going to make sure that all our kids are engaged? That's kind of the big question, right now for the duration.
Jodie?
I would echo what my colleagues have said about engagement, also the balance and what we from families varies drastically because of what their situations in. I would speak to probably one level, which I think has been the most challenging for remote learning, and that would be our elementary level, as well as our special ed and ENL populations. If you think of primary kids and you're looking at 5 years old, online learning is just not a great model for them. They're hands-on, they are engaged, and having them sit in front of a screen to try and interact with their teachers has been a real struggle, not only for the families, but also for our teachers. That's just not, it's not really the best model. I think we all know that. So if I had to look at different levels, I think it's not great at any level what we've had to kind of put together. I think our teachers do a fabulous job, but certainly our primary special ed and ENL students is more challenging to meet their needs.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Joe or Adrian, from the BOCES perspective, what's been the biggest struggle?
It's really a huge challenge, and the teachers have been incredible being creative, but it's just tough with career technical education. If you ask 100 of our students while they're in the program, I will guarantee you, because we know, because we do this research and we build our programs and serve our kids, 100 of them will tell you, I like to use my hands, I like to create things, I like to build things, and they don't have that opportunity. And the shift, the teacher creativity has been tremendous. We had one of our culinary teachers, he just did a version of Chopped with them and had all the kids online, go to your pantry, pick 5 things, here's what we're going to do. He's been running lessons out of a food truck. We have our folks in Diesel and Autobody, working with partners we have in different shops and broadcasting lessons and going through things. Kids using their own materials, sharing with each other about how they're, everything from fashion design to networking, to our network apps, to our video game design courses and across the board. But it's really tough when you're in a program for the reasons of this is what you like to do, is to build and create those things. It has been not only a challenge for the staff, but I know it's been a huge disappointment for our kids as well. So we have to get back to a place to be able to provide that opportunity, because under these circumstances, it's just not the best experience that they can have. And I know that weighs heavily on everybody in our organization to be able to provide that for them. We look forward to getting back to a place where we can do that. In the interim, it's been great how they've managed it. But the reality is, for students that want to be engaged in that work, that's what we do for them. So to be able to do that, I think is going to be really important for them, and candidly, just because we've already heard from our partners, incredibly important for the workforce. Right now, all of our partners do their recruiting and hiring, and we place kids. And that's the conversations we have with them. Have they been able to do A, B, and C? So the workforce in the region is vital upon us being able to get those skills back to those kids. Real pragmatic to get, to contribute to the workforce and support the regional economy.
So let me pick up on that for a moment. And I know it's hard sometimes to look forward. We just learned that the governor has said that we're not going back to school this year. Education is in phase 4, I think, right now of New York's reopening. Those of us at the university are trying to think about what does that mean for us come fall. Are we back on campus? And if so, what does that look like? It's not going to look like it did last fall. We know that. If we're not back on campus, what does that mean? Because we can't do what we did, which was essentially crisis education, right? We moved quickly to move things online, as you all have been talking about. But Jodie, your point, you talked about CTE, and we can't continue that in the way we necessarily have. There's some needs there, but I know you don't have a crystal ball, any of you. There's a lot of things that are beyond our control about what the fall may look like, but what are you doing right now? Just what you're thinking about fall and the possibilities of what fall might look like, and trying to prepare for the various scenarios that might exist. I'll open that to anybody who wants to jump in.
So I'll take it to start. I think, we've talked as a region school superintendents about the idea that we have right now, we have a capacity to grow from this and learn from it, and people understand that this was thrust upon us in a moment's notice. But now we have considerable time to start planning, and regionally, through the BOCES and a group of superintendents, we've began reopening plans, and we've started doing that, looking at different capabilities of each district. So what is reopening for a small district like Schoharie look like? And we're talking about that with other districts that are our size. Compared to Bethlehem, it looks much different. But we understand come September, there isn't going to be forgiveness if we can't do it well. So we have to really work hard at it right now, prepare, plan, and start to build capacity to reopen in a way that's going to be safe. And it probably will look far different than it does now.
Yeah, I would agree with Dave. We've been talking about reopening with our colleagues in the region. We already have some groups of people, committees formed within our district to look at possibly what that look like. If you look to different countries and schools that have reopened, they look far different than prior to their closures. So we're talking about the fact that perhaps we still will be doing some kind of remote learning. How do you manage social distance in schools? Do you look at varied schedules? Do you only have parts of your student population attending at certain points? So we are going to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And maybe all our planning will be irrelevant in September. And if so, that would be wonderful. And we're back, school is normal. But I think to not prepare for some of those changes would, as Dave said, would be foolish on our parts. And people are going to expect, our families and students and our staff are going to expect some guidance with all of this.
I think at the building level, I've been fortunate to be involved in district level planning, but at the building level, it comes back to that question that we ask. Is there something that's going overlooked or something that we've missed? When we talk about a reopening, we don't just want to have a plan A and plan B. You got to work that out, extrapolate that to maybe a plan C, D, and E, and then really think about all the variables that go into it. And try to control those as best you can, and that makes it easier when to kind of mitigate some negative effects of things you can't control. To have solid plans, and maybe a piece of Plan B will work for a different area that you're trying to do, but having that trust in the team and having that open dialogue to kind of put different ideas out there and try to make sure that we're covering everything we can to the best of our capabilities as far as for the fall. We're going to need to be flexible, and we're going to need to be able to make decisions quickly, but to have a few different plans to think about and work from, I think is really important as we get into the summer months, really planning for a successful fall as best we can. No one knows what it's going to be, but let's have a few different options to make sure that we can make it the best we can.
So we've talked a lot about communication. I'm going to turn to Adrienne. She just unmuted herself throughout this session, and the importance of communication. But I think, as you all just talked about, we don't know what the future holds. There's a lot of scenarios out there and a lot of unknowns. And so if it's a student or a teacher or a parent, there's a lot of wonderings, right, about what this looks like moving forward. So just, Adrienne, your thoughts from a communication perspective, how do we reconcile those two issues?
Well, it's not getting too far ahead of ourselves, and we can do all the planning that, behind the scenes, right? We're doing, like Dave and Jodie talked about, we're having these planning meetings. We're talking about all of these. Well, what about this? Well, what about this? I think as we communicate, we're going to want to be very deliberate and very in the moment in letting people know we have plans, but showing how those plans can and will change as more guidance comes out, as the facts on the ground change, because what we know now will be very different than what we know in a month or a week or 2 months, September. The other thing I'll add is in the planning work we're doing, we're looking at a lot of what supports need to be in place in terms of mental health, in terms of academic gaps that exist, both academic gaps obviously for students, but mental health for students and for staff. And how are we able to support folks as they come back in those areas, because that's going to be really important. So it's trying to anticipate those kinds of things in addition to the operational considerations that we're going to have to make.
So as we look forward, there's a couple of questions in the text box I'll pull out here, both from high school teachers. One asking about guidance on the amount of work we give to students in any given time, given all the issues they're dealing with, and how do they grapple with this new environment, and correspondingly, how do we grade students right now? They're dealing with a lot. What are our expectations in terms of grading? And so, just any general advice you might have or you've given to your teachers about how to think about adjusting workloads and adjusting grading for students.
So I'll step in just a little bit on this because one of the things that happened early on in my district, I had a teacher who came in and had, we have a Google Classroom, we're a Google district, we use Schoology, we were 1-to-1, 7 through 12 with Chromebooks. So we thought we were in pretty good shape, but we didn't have Wi-Fi. We weren't ensured that every teacher has the internet or has Wi-Fi capabilities at their house. And I had a teacher come in with a fistful of materials, walking out the door going, I don't even know how to use all this from my home. And yet, we have to grade his students in the challenging course. So the advice I gave at that time was make sure that if we're grading students that it's defensible. That if you're going to have a student that doesn't pass your class because they haven't been connected, it's a real problem. And so much like it's a real problem that you don't fully understand how to use all these tools at this time. So making sure and ensuring that the grades that we're giving are defensible and appropriate has been a challenge, but it's really important that we understand to err on the side of the student, to err on the side of trying to give the student credit as much as possible. So I'll answer that. And then there's also something in the chat with regard to Verizon jetpacks. And early on, we had tried to search for any device that we could use to increase internet connectivity. And as we were trying to purchase devices to send out to homes, we were finding that anything that we could buy wasn't going to connect any better than the Verizon jetpacks we're connecting. So it is definitely a struggle, and I think if Governor Cuomo wants to do something with regard to the Gates Foundation, let's get internet and broadband throughout the entire state. I think I answered 3 questions.
No, that was great. That was perfect. So unless anybody else wants to jump in on that one.
I can just address that for the grading.
Yep.
We as a district decided how we're going to move forward with grading. And we're not grading students' work currently. There are some classes that are college level and different criteria, but we were doing it as gave the kids an idea of where they stood when we closed, and are doing essentially now, are you completing the work? Are you not completing the work? And there'll be no failures at the year. Everyone would get an incomplete, and we'd work with them to try and make up whatever we need to make up to get course credit. And I think this kind of ties into your question above about the normal. And I think one of the things, we have become so focused on grade and test, and kids have become so focused on what's my grade that it's, for some teachers, they said it's been somewhat enlightening and somewhat disturbing to not have to just focus on grades. And I think for our kids, it's been the same because they're so used to turning something in and getting a grade. So if anything we can take away is that learning can occur without always grading, would be a great transition to a new normal.
I love that. I love that answer. And maybe for the rest of you, what is something that you think, what can we learn from this current moment that we should hang on to or help us rethink what the new normal will look like in the future?
I'll step in for Adrian, or I can step in just for a second and say I'd love to see the traditional school day look a little bit different, and for that the traditional school year. So I think that what comes to mind most though is flipped classrooms and the benefit of having flipped classrooms. If we had if the new normal looked from K-12 where teachers were adept at flipping their classroom, this would have been a little bit easier. So maybe that becomes part of the new normal for us. I'm optimistic about trying to do some of that.
Adrian?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, there's been so many times during this situation where I've heard people say, well, normally this is what we would do, and normally this is what we would do, and all that is out the window, right? So we've done so many things overnight during this that some of us have tried for years to get accomplished, and out of necessity, it's just happened. And I think we've given ourselves permission to do that, right? To just say, nope, this is the best way to do it. This is how we're going to do it. And I'd like to see that continue. And, that mindset of this is the best way. If it is, once it's sometimes it's not, but if it is, let's just go with that and not go round and round and make things kind of just sit on the table forever. So I'd like to see a little bit more of that sense of urgency in more things.
Joe?
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly, Adrian. It's interesting that, we have has the largest distance learning network in the state. It goes from the Canadian border over to Utica, Vermont, Mass borders, and down to Ulster County. 150,000 students, 130-something school districts. I mean, it's massive, and we've been doing it for a long time. And it's one of the biggest in the country, next to Florida Virtual Schools and some of the other real statewide networks. But we have been, and all the districts that we work with, engaged in this for a long time. And what really has come now, to Adrian's point, is people have been had to force their hand a little bit. And I don't think anybody, it's kind of like people still talk about 21st century skills. I mean, it's 2020. I mean, you're going to talk about 21st century skills 10 years from now, again, too. It's pretty much the 21st century. And, to say that technology isn't part of it is living under a rock. But the flip side of that is we've been, as an organization, as a network, as a service provider, engaged in this work for a long time. We have the strongest backbone. We run the strongest networks. We provide access. Again, whether it's distance learning, whether it's synchronous, whether it's asynchronous, whether it's anything in that space, what we do is enable the learning to take place. And I think that's really important. When you're in a structure that enables it, I mean, I'm sure everybody saw the Zoom stuff in the New York Times and all these other things, where all of a sudden, it's the flavor of the day to do what you can. And kids and staff and folks are out there wandering around in environments that aren't secure. So we enable that to take place, where the teacher can leverage their talents is the instructor. So a lot of what you're hearing, and this is what we're working with at the state level as well, is saying, look, we have expertise in this. We have colleagues on the ground that are experts in this in classrooms. Let us work together and be examples of how this can happen. It's not this isn't a new idea, right? And I'm sure we would all agree with that. We all know tons of educators that can do it, but as Dave said, I think if this is a catalyst to get some more of them to realize I can leverage an asset to be better at my craft, I think that's a real important place to go.
I think to just kind of go along with what Joe and Adrian are saying, for me, it's been really refreshing the kind of level of transparency. I just think that people don't have time or patience to kind of mince words. So it's been nice to hear, like, this is what I need to be successful. Take that back to the team and say, okay, what can we do to help this person out, or this group of stakeholders out? They're telling us exactly what they need. What do we need to do in order to make them successful? So I think that level of transparency has been refreshing in this.
No, it's great. And I think there has been a lot of movement, a lot of communication. We've done things that people have said we couldn't do, right? It's not the way it's always been done. And hopefully we can hang on to that sense of urgency and change and responsiveness to our communities that are out there. Equity is a huge issue, right? We think all about equity. And I think the current crisis has exasperated existing equity issues and created new ones that we have to tackle right now. What are the issues of equity that are rising in your own work, and how are you addressing those? And Joe, I know you've got some data, so maybe I'll turn it over to you first.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jason. I just think holistically, and this is one of those things that has come to mean a lot of different things. It's like STEM. Everything's STEM now. Everything's equity. Everything, all these kinds of things. But the reality is, which no one can come to terms with, is, we always get the lecture about how your zip code should determine this, that, this, that, and the other thing. But the way that it works is it does, to a large degree. And I think acknowledging that up front is really important. So equity in terms of that lens has always been bad, and now it's just that much worse. And the erosion of the middle, I see continue across really a lot of the folks that we work with and what they're able to do. And I could just speak as a region, just in terms from a technology standpoint. As a region, we're a little over 24,000 laptops or devices, I should say, short to go one-to-one. So if the statement was where you wanted every child to have a device, and the Chromebook is really the flavor across almost all the districts, 22 of the 24. You need 24,000 more of those, and different, depending on scale, different districts have used a different approach to get as much resource as possible to children. If a family has 3 or 4 kids in school, you don't have 3 or 4 devices. You have one, and then you have teachers that are, working in different grade levels. You've got elementary and a middle school, you have things on top of each other, you have one device, and it's just not optimal. But on the other hand, when you have limited devices, it's the best you can do. And you couple that with, in some districts, we're estimating from the folks on the ground, we have all of this geo-mapped by zip code and a lot of other stuff because we're using that data to hopefully inform our access problems. Some districts is up to 40% without access. And just to Dave's point earlier, if you're in Bern or if you're in Rensselaerville, we got a lot of folks are on satellite up there, so you're overpaying for a really bad connection on top of everything else. So that just, you take these two challenges and you use a lens of, it wasn't equitable for the sake of argument before, and it's just that much worse. And that only is from this pure technological access lens. And you multiply that on top of everything else that's going on. I know you go to Watervliet, there's a hot spot in the McDonald's parking lot. We know that for a fact. There's one at the high school, there's one at the public library, and there's one in the McDonald's parking lot. Now, if you go to another community and you say you need to go to the McDonald's parking lot so you can get access to do your homework, that would never fly. And I think everybody on this call would agree with that. So there's the bigger picture of understanding what this really means operationally. And then what we're doing is working with a lot of municipalities because they have their own set of challenges regarding working in this environment. They still need to do town meetings. They're coming to a larger realization that the municipalities they represent don't have access, or they have different challenges to be able to provide that to their residents. So we're hoping to parlay our work with schools and our work with municipalities to have a larger, broader access lens. But that is a really pragmatic, real life situation tomorrow when you have to go to McDonald's parking lot to get your homework. We all need to agree that you can't have those conditions, and it certainly isn't fair to anybody to have to be able to do that to operate in this space. So we know, again, zip codes, we've done all that mapping, where these pieces are and where the real challenges are. But until those hurdles come, that is just exponentially made what is not equitable. Just another example of how much more it really is when you are really defined into a space where some folks have opportunity and others just don't.
No, Joe, it's a great point. And obviously access is huge in terms of who gets it and who doesn't. That's even more clear now. And noting our time, we got about 5 minutes left, but I do want to ask you all sort of what's been your biggest issue with equity with it right now. So maybe Giulio, I'll ask you first.
I think for us, it's providing that tech, providing the hotspots, figuring out I've been fortunate to learn a lot more about special education and meeting the needs of that IEP, whether it's printed copies, tests read, directions read. This has kind of shined a spotlight on that group of kids to make sure that we're doing the best to meet the needs of that IEP. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of personal work. It's a lot of phone calls. It's home visits. It's just making sure that what the needs are and then trying to do your best to support those needs.
Good point, David.
So getting our staff to fully understand equity has been a challenge. Equity from the standpoint of race, in particular here in Schoharie, our data shows that we need to improve our understanding of our students' backgrounds, where they're coming from, and our free and reduced lunch rate's about 48%, so half of our kids living below the poverty level. Do our teachers, who are highly educated, predominantly white, middle class, understand the issues that are occurring in our households? So we partnered with a company and have been providing professional development for the last 2 years, trying to really understand what equity means. It's a huge problem where the top third of our students are still engaged with the university and the high school classrooms and really never missed a beat with those classes. But our special education population, we're struggling to connect with them and do teletherapy and things that are vital to their education. So after 2 years of working with a company to help build capacity in this area, today I got an email from that company saying our last sessions, they don't know how they're wrapping them up because they're going out of business. And so, it's a reality we're going to have to face. We have a class for 7th graders here in Schoharie that every 7th grader has to understand race, racism, diversity, and embrace differences. And we're teaching kids to be more empathic. That class has been awesome. We were building that up to 8th grade for next year, where every 8th grader would be in a class, and down to 6th grade. So middle school students would be getting a real strong foundation. But with regard to our budget, that's an area that may have to go away, unfortunately. So I think we've been working hard to build capacity and get our staff trained and better understanding, but we got a lot of work to do, and we'll need some more resources to do it. To that end, there was a question in the chat: do we believe that equity will improve when districts are funded differently? And I think that it's more about training and building capacity to get our workforce to understand how to connect with kids depending on their background. And that's where earlier when I noted, this window that we have into kids' households is really opening up eyes. So I think that's very helpful.
Jodie, how about you?
Sure. I have some of the things we've talked about equity a lot, particularly during this crisis, where we've shifted our instruction totally and talking about, many of the kids who we were concerned about. For us, it's our special ed population, some of our ENL students and our economic disadvantaged students are harder to engage in this environment. Not all, but many of them. And so the equity among how those students are performing and the potential gaps that we could see in regards to not only their skill set, but also their ability to come back to school in the fall and move ahead. So when we talk about equity, that was part of our discussion as to why it wasn't fair to grade students during this time, because we don't know what potential issues they're dealing with in order to be fair and try and address some of these issues as part of our rationale for making some of those decisions.
So thinking about this, thank you all for that. And I think it's important because it gives us food for thought about what we need to do in the future. Thinking about the last question, I'm going to pivot a little bit on it. Thinking about how do we create schools that feel safe and secure for students is important, but I think it gets to a bigger issue also of what are the skill sets that teachers and leaders are going to be needing in the future as we move forward. And obviously, as the dean of a school of education, I'm interested in how do we better prepare the next generation of teachers and leaders for whatever the new reality is going to be in schools. And so to think a little bit about this question 7, which, as somebody pointed out in the chat, could be a session all in itself. What are the skills of the future? Joe, you talked about we're sort of in 2020. We need to move beyond the 21st century skills for students, but I think also probably for teachers and leaders as well. what are those skills that are emerging that you all see that we want to make sure teachers and leaders are prepared to have as they move into these roles?
So I'll jump in. I don't want to step on Jodie. I'll just say compassion, empathy, kindness. If we started there, and then understanding relationships and being very child-centered in your approach. So if we can have teachers that really, understand kids and relate to what kids need. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't comment. Dr. Oliver Robinson often will encourage us to make sure we have teachers, or we're hiring teachers that look like the kids that are in our school districts. And I think that's very, very important.
Yep. Jodie?
Sure. I think looking toward the future, obviously, we talk about this environment, training and technology for teachers is obviously important, but I agree with Dave that, kids are coming to us from all different environments, and teachers have to be able to relate to kids and have empathy for where they're coming from. They're not all like us, and they didn't all grow up in the same type of family structure that we did. And I think there's a lot more challenges that families are facing, and certainly moving forward after this, kids are going to be coming to school with a lot of challenges their families are facing. If you look at what the unemployment rates are and are expected to at a time when schools are potentially losing money, I think part of responsibility will be to make sure that we're allocating the resources to help teachers with any training they need in regards to mental health supports, related to behavior and how to appropriately address those within their classrooms. Because, you can't just refer kids out to someone else and make it someone else's problem, because kids are going to come with us with many challenges that we need to be prepared to address.
Leo?
I would say that the relationship building is key. I think as educators, one of the most important things we do is provide that stability to families. And now during this crisis, building those relationships, understanding where kids come from is so important. It's crucial moving forward. This situation's kind of given us, the rare opportunity to kind of examine where we're weak, to look at our weaknesses and to work to kind of fortify those so we're in a better position moving forward. But I would agree with my colleagues in saying that relationship building is really huge. And that's something that it takes a lot of time to learn how to build those relationships, but they're so important, and they can just kind of go across all aspects of a district.
Adrian?
And the only other thing I'll add, and is something I've thought a lot about, is there's the populations of students we worry about normally. There's the kids we have on our radar normally, but because of the nature of this situation, like Jodie talked about, parents working from home and the stress that comes with that situation, potentially parents getting laid off. So now we have a whole new set of kids and issues and families that we're going to be worrying about. We are worrying about, and will bring potentially a different dynamic when school reopens.
Joe, I'll turn to you for the final word.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I guess we really need to get a network of mental health supports in the schools, and a nod to Hal here and my friend Catherine Breyer Lawson. And we were doing this work in schools years and years ago, and knew the effect. So now you extrapolate this every day. Every day we see domestic violence, right? What's the messaging we get at 11:30, right? Every day, domestic violence is up. Indicators of child abuse is up. Indicators of mental health factors are up. Unemployment's through the roof. Where does everything coalesce every day? And it's in our schools. So we deal with this all the time. And I certainly don't have to say this to any of my colleagues because that's our life 24/7. So as organic organizations, that is what are a big part of the challenge that we're faced with all the time. And unless this network, a deliberate network of support, can come in and play a role in the fabric of how the structures can work to provide the supports, it's going to be a huge challenging whole. And if every life matters, I don't think I'm just looking, Jaleel, Jody. I mean, we all have run districts or buildings where we've had a suicide or we've had death, and all those things that go with that. Some of us more recently than others. And we could ask a bunch of our colleagues, and we would all agree with that. And if every life is as important as every life is claimed to be every single day, then we really need to make an effort to have to underscore collectively to get these resources. And I think it's through partnerships, it's through professionals in these businesses of how we can build that network to provide those. Because the reality is when the support's provided in a school, co-located in a school, attendance is up, grades are up, access to the family is up, access to med management is up, access to psych services is up. So the reality is that that's how it works, and that's how it works best. And when every indicator on this side is saying we're going to have a whole lot of additional challenges based on what's going on economically and otherwise in our region, in our state, in our country, the supports to be able to do that are just going to be that much more critical. And I will leave it at that. Jason.
No, I think that's a great point. One thing I heard in all of this is you can't get to Bloom's taxonomy of learning unless you meet Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People need to be safe and secure, and those mental health issues are so vitally important. So thank you, Joe. In fact, I want to invite you all to our community conversations next week, which is entitled Considering Stress and Trauma During COVID-19 Pandemic Implications for Administrators, Teachers, Parents, and Families, which I think dovetails really well on what Joe and others have been talking about so far. Again, invite you all to check out our remoteed.org website. We thank you for joining us. We know that we went over by a few minutes, but the voices here were so important in offering such great information. I think it was certainly worth the while to hold on. And finally, my deepest thanks to our panelists today. You guys took time out of what I know are busy schedules. You have so much to do, but I think you can see the thanks rolling in on the chat box if you have it up. But it was just a delight to be able to have a conversation with all of you. To be able to bring those perspectives to bear on this important issue moving forward. So thank you once again for all that you're doing as leaders, and for all of you on this phone call or Zoom session for being with us today. And with that, we'll say adieu. Be well.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Take care.